Hi, it's Joe. Earlier this month, I was a guest on Australian True Crime, a podcast hosted by Michelle Laurie. We talked about my night on the 1st of October 2005, but it was an expansive chat. Michelle being a lover of and frequent visitor to the island, she had an understanding of the geography and culture of Bali. The word Bali, it doesn't mean a place for me. That one word can mean an event, a time, a reason for why someone is acting the way they are. Bali. It's shorthand for a lot of things in my world. It's nice to be reminded that Bali is a word that also means awesome people, beautiful beaches, and a different way of life. Michelle's memories of that place and from that time led to a chat I've not had about Bali before. I first saw Michelle on Aussie TV show Spicks and Specks all the way back in 2005. Since then, she's been a fixture in Australian entertainment, on TV, radio, and of course, podcasts. As of time of recording, Australian True Crime has aired almost 800 episodes, interviewing journalists, cops, authors, and survivors. And to kick off 2026, I was fortunate enough to talk Forgotten Bombs on Australian True Crime. Michelle and her producer, Matthew Tankard, ran a tight ship. Easy organising, they were working with some cool tech to get the best video and sound, and Michelle clearly had listened to Forgotten Bombs. That doesn't often happen. Michelle asked some insightful questions. I hope I gave unexpected answers. It's going to be a completely different series in 2026, a hard 180 away from my personal experience of terrorism. Work starts on the new show this Monday, so subscribe to our channel. Something fun will be out later this year. And now, here's my interview on Australian True Crime.
In 2002, Australia's favourite holiday destination, the Indonesian island of Bali, was rocked by 3 bomb explosions. 1 outside the Australian embassy and 2 in the middle of the nightclub strip. 202 people were killed, including 88 Australians, and jihadist group Jemaah Islamiyah claimed responsibility. Such is Australia's love affair with the island that by 2005, just 3 years later, tourism had largely resumed. A group of teenagers from Newcastle were determined to travel there together, but rather than let them go alone, many of their parents decided to make the trip as well. In the end, the group numbered over 40, and many of them travelled to the picturesque Jimbaran Bay on the night of October 1 for dinner on the beach. That night, 3 more bombs were detonated at Jimbaran Bay. Joe Frost was one of the teenagers who organised the trip. He was on the beach of Jimbaran that night, and he's produced a podcast about the experience called Forgotten Bombs Bali 2005. He joins us on Australian True Crime to talk about it. This is Australian True Crime. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is created, the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And a warning, this episode of the podcast contains graphic descriptions of violence.
It felt like a silly title for a little while there because the anniversary came along and I was obviously getting interviewed a little bit. And, you know, when people are sort of saying, tell us about this podcast, it's called Forgotten Bombs, that you're sort of saying everyone's forgotten, but that we're really making a big effort to remember at the moment. So I felt a little bit silly for a little while there, but, you know, for the better part of the 20 years, it was forgotten. And I suppose, like, a good example was, when we were talking about doing an anniversary for the 20 years, I called someone at Randwick City Council, and every year they've got that really beautiful, I don't know if you've seen the 2002 memorial that they've got on Coogee Beach.
Yeah.
The 3 interlocking, like it looks like people sort of leaning on one another. It's gorgeous. Yeah, I think it's really wonderful. And so every year they have a memorial for the 2002 Bali bombing there. And I called Randwick City Council and spoke to one of the people there who's got something to do with that memorial every year. And he couldn't have been more helpful. He was really, really lovely. And sort of like midway through our conversation, he just goes, what Bali bombing are you talking about? Because like I only know about the 2002 Bali bombing. And like you just have to laugh where you're like, mate, you had something to do with the first Bali bombing every year. And you're not even aware that there's another one. And I don't think that's uncommon, you know, even for someone who has an active role in memorializing the first Bali bombing every year. that there was a second one just wasn't even on his radar. And I think that's pretty much the case for a lot of Australians.
I think it's a great title, and I think it works because I was surprised by the title, but then as I'm listening, I get it. It reveals itself to me as you talk as a survivor about experiences like that. I realize, I feel terrible. Yeah, you're right. We do. Maybe we lump them in together. Maybe we talk about the Bali bombings and immediately think the Sari Club. And I mean, I even had to remind myself about the embassy bombings. You know, in both cases, embassies were targeted, which I'd forgotten about. That had passed me by. But for me, Jimbaran Bay is maybe one of my favourite places in the world. It's a place that I spend a lot of time. I've spent time there for many, many years. So maybe for that reason, it stays in my mind. I'm there probably at least once a year. I'm sitting at those cafes. I'm sitting on the beach at a table, and I'm trying to imagine that night. And you describe it unbelievably. I've heard a lot of people talk about, give me witness accounts of events. But yours is astounding.
I suppose just to give a little bit of the broader context. So it was there were about 45 people from Newcastle. We all came over to Bali it was the last sort of days of September in 2005. And it had started out as a group of mates who were sort of 16, 17 years old. And I got the version of it from the parents for the podcast. And then sort of which didn't make it to air was that I got the version from the boys themselves. And I was like, oh, this is slightly different.
It was great because it also goes into, it was only 3 years after the first bombings. And so I remember that period of time. I think I, gave Bali a miss for maybe a year. Like we got back to business as usual pretty quickly in terms of going to Bali, but I remember the security being stepped up. I remember them looking for car bombs all the time, always with the mirrors under every car as you went in and out everywhere. And you go into the fact that the terrorist organisations responded to that. Again, in your research, it's unbelievable that, they realised, okay, we can't do car bombs again. But I love that the boys, the kids, they're 17, they wanted to go by themselves, and the mums went, well, no, that's not happening. But as we do, they went, we'll come with you. We don't want you to miss out. We'll all go.
And so, it started out as, I suppose, probably about half a dozen boys, and then their parents got involved, and then, other parents came and other families came. And so I think my family were in the sort of the second wave of families invited. I was the oldest of my siblings that were there, but my youngest brother would have been 10 at the time. So, there were kids. He would have been the youngest kid there, but, sort of kids aged 10 through to 17. And then myself and my friend Alita Letterwash, who was 21, I was 20. And then, a big group of parents. So all told about 45 people. On the Saturday, we went and we did this cultural tour where we, got on a bus and went off into the countryside there, sort of went up and went to the markets, went to Ubud and, had this, it was a lovely day, but it's a big day. And obviously Bali is really hot, and the bus didn't have air conditioning and the bus driver didn't have an off switch. Wow. So everyone was just sweating. And this dude just didn't stop talking.
And the traffic, even in those days, the traffic's hardcore when you're driving a bus around Bali. Long day.
So, it had been a really long day. And we got back to the hotel and the bus driver said, look, as an added extra, would anybody like to go for dinner on Jimbaran Bay? And like all the kids were just like, hard no.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Which of course understandable.
Yeah.
And I think a bunch of the adults sort of said, let's go do that. And I was on the fence. I was sort of leaning towards no, but had an hour to decide, and I went for a swim, and I had a chat to my dad, and he said, look, your mum and I, we're not going to go because like the kids don't want to get back on the bus, and we'll hang around with them. But he gave me a little nudge. He was like, look, mate, it's going to be this beautiful fresh seafood. It's this gorgeous sunset. Like, what's to lose?
Yeah.
So we all went along, and there were, I think it was 16 like parents, sort of people aged in their 40s and 50s, and then a leader who, as I say, was aged 21, and myself, and and I was 20 at the time. And so we went to one of the warungs there, called Nyoman.
Can you describe for us Jimbaran Bay, Jimbaran Beach, that area? Again, it's one of my favorite. It's incredibly beautiful. It's like something out of a movie to me or a magazine. But
can I be so bold as to ask you to describe it? Because I've not been there in 20 years, and I feel like I'm.
Fair enough. I did wonder that, actually. I wonder if he's ever been back. Well, it's like the tables and chairs are on the sand, and then behind you, up the top of the sand, there are the warangs, they're called in Indonesian, the cafes, and each one of them selling lobster, fresh lobster, prawns, fish. So you're all sitting out on the sand on timber tables and chairs. People are falling off them constantly because a combination of being drunk and the sand. And when the tide comes in, it's washing up on your feet, and the odd chair washes away, and they run out and grab it. And there's the guys walking along the beach selling toys for kids, light up toys for kids. And it's just the most beautiful, to me, the most beautiful, relaxing, magical environment. That's how I remember it. And it's sort of nestled between two big resorts, isn't it? On one end, you've got the Intercontinental, and on the other end, you've got the Four Seasons. So there's that however many 100 metres there of restaurants and that. So that's where you guys went that night.
That's unbelievable. Like, it just sounds like it hasn't changed at all.
It hasn't.
That's exactly how I remember it.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I guess the only thing that is that, as you say, it's all these wooden tables and chairs on the sand. And even though there are all the different warungs, and then so therefore it's, maybe a dozen different restaurants, it feels like one big restaurant because it's just all those timber tables and chairs on the sand. And so they came down, we ordered some food and drinks, and they went off and they got some drinks, and then we waited for food, and we waited for, like, it was probably the better part of an hour. And, like, I don't think anyone was particularly suspicious at the time, but in hindsight, it has become a point of contention for, like, well, you just never wait that long for food in Bali. They're on it.
And also, one of the ladies on your podcast said that there were no guys selling toys and things along the beach that night. And I thought, that's really weird.
I think it was more that they weren't coming up to get in out. I remember seeing a couple of people selling stuff, but they didn't come up to the tables. So they were down on the water there. And for a long time, I had the same suspicions of, like, what did they know? And the thing that I keep coming back to is that there is just no accuracy with a bomb. And so if I knew that there was going to be a bomb at my place of work, I'm not avoiding a table. I'm calling in sick.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be there that day. So I have nothing to go on either way. But when people raise these suspicions, my own personal belief, and as I say, I don't have evidence either way, is just that it seems implausible that you would know there's going to be a bomb and you'd still come to the place where the bombing's going to be and just be like, oh, I might avoid the table of white people because there are other tables of white people.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because that's just not my experience of Balinese people at all. And it really hurt my heart when I heard some of the mums in particular talking about their fear after the bomb that they weren't safe anywhere. They felt like they didn't want to get in a taxi because, does that guy want me dead? They didn't want to, they wanted a police escort to the airport because they were scared of being attacked again. And I thought, oh, that's so awful. And the Balinese would be devastated.
Yeah. So we waited, and I guess we didn't get food, but we got drinks. And that became important because there were bottles and glasses on the table. And I think the sun had set, and then, so I was facing away from the ocean. I was looking up, inland, and had the ocean at my back. And I just heard the loudest bang I'd ever heard in my life. going off to my left, which was up to the north of the beach. And I sort of scrambled to my feet and I gripped the top of my chair and just sort of acting out of, I guess it was just it was involuntary. I didn't have a moment of thinking about what to do. And Alida, who was the other one who was 21, her parents were there, and she sort of had a moment of, she called it clarity. And funny enough, I didn't mention it in the podcast, but we'd had a discussion maybe 2 or 3 days before. We'd been sitting by the pool and I'd been going out at night. I'd been going out to the pubs or whatever, having a few drinks and enjoying myself. And she hadn't. And she'd said to me, like, I think this is a dangerous thing to do, you know, like they targeted nightclubs last time. And I said to her, I was like, Alida, if you come to Bali and you were going to go to the pubs and you don't because you're scared about being attacked in a terrorist attack, you're letting the terrorists win. So, like, I'm doing my part here. Like, I'm
fighting terrorism.
I'm fighting terrorism.
By going to the pub. But we were all saying that at the time. That's why I went back to Bali. That's what we were all saying at the time. So
you've got to continue to live your life.
Yeah.
So she got up and ran. She sprinted off away from where the noise had gone off, from that loud bang, had ran to the southern end of the beach.
What's really interesting to me when you talk about that moment is how many people assumed it wasn't a bomb. How people in your group, people on the beach, a lot of people thought it's a gas cylinder or something like that, wasn't it? There was quite a few moments of people kind of standing there chatting and wondering what was that.
I think it was a response of like just trying to maintain calm. I think logically they probably knew what it was, but if you don't know for a fact, don't jump to the assumption. And also it's rare that panicking is the right response.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that was probably the thing, to just be like, let's all just stay calm, stay chill, you know, like people are already, because there's, you know, maybe hundreds, if not 1,000 people on the beach, and a lot had immediately, you know, probably been close enough to know exactly what it was. So it was a panic-stricken situation, people screaming and running into the water and, you know, just getting out of there. Whereas, yeah, at our table, for the most part, you know, there had been no, it's probably just a gas bottle exploding from one of the barbecues. Stay calm, but we should probably start to think about getting out of here. Like the night's over either way. All that said, you know, we're talking about the space of 30 seconds between the first bomb going off, a leader running, people sort of deciding what to do. And I just remember gripping the top of my chair, and I had this moment of like, I should run. And every part of me was saying, run, 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 get out, get out. It was like this ego and like stupid male pride of being like, a leader ran. I don't want to look like I'm scared like a leader. And so, and like all these people who are also like adults, and I didn't want them to think that I just didn't want people to think that I was scared. I was just like, the things that go through your head when you're millimeters from death, and you still have a moment of like, but what if people think what if people think I'm scared? It's like, dude, you should be.
And I mean, you're talking about, you're literally looking to your left, which is where that first explosion, the sound of that came from. To your right, I believe, are the Zelenskys, Mr. and Mrs. Zelensky.
Yes. So to my left was the where the bomb had come from, and I'd been sitting next to Penny Anisic, and her husband Paul came and stood behind her and just sort of put his hands sort of protectively on her shoulders, as I recall it. And then to my right were Fiona and Colin Zelensky, and I wasn't looking at them. I was just looking towards where the blast had come from. And then the next thing I knew, I was just face down in the sand. And it was pain, but you know, when something so otherworldly happens, your body goes into shock, and it's like your brain sort of says, yeah, it hurts, but we're not going to, that's not important right now. There's more important things. We'll deal with the pain later. And so I remember that it hurt, but that it wasn't a pain that I was particularly conscious of. But I was face down in the sand. I had no visual of what was going on. I just had that flash in my mind that I think anyone, who's old enough to remember the Sari Club would have seen. And it was just that burning building. And I'm unable to see anything, but I felt a burning sensation on my legs, and that fire in the Sari Club flashed through my mind. And I thought, my legs are on fire. So I jumped up and I pulled off my board shorts and I sprinted into the water. Getting to the water, I sort of thought, all right, I'm safe now. And there were hundreds of people in the water all screaming and yelling. And at that point, it was just me. I'd lost everybody else that I'd been with. And I sort of had a moment to assess what was going on. And I, in that moment, realized that I hadn't been on fire. I wasn't on fire. And what it turned out was that it had been the sand had whipped up from the blast and had sprayed my legs, and I'd got like sandblast from it. And it's a burn, but it's a friction burn, not a flame burn. But as a consequence, I was standing there in, just a pair of undies and my ripped up shirt. So it was, it's not the ideal, it's not exactly the clothes you want to be wearing in a situation like that.
I love how you talk about that in the podcast, by the way. It's so down to earth, and it's great. And too often when we're doing things like writing books or making podcasts, we forget to be just real and just talk about how we really felt, because it's a bit embarrassing. And I love the fact that you talk about finding yourself in this horrible situation in your undies, and how that's just adds to the whole shitness of the story. It's great. But what had happened in that period of time, as everyone is looking to the northern end of the beach where the first explosion had come from, is that where you guys were at the southern end, another bomber had approached your table. Is that right? When you were looking the other way?
Yes. And so a bomber had come up, and look, what went through that person's mind in the final moments of his life, we'll never know. But in my research was found a copy of the plan that they were working off, and it had said explicitly target white people. And so we had been, a table of 20 white people. It seems logical that we had been a fairly clear target. So this person walked up and wearing a bomb that was, it was full of shrapnel, and for years I had thought that it was a mixture of ball bearings and glass, but the glass had actually been the glass that had been on the table. So the bomb goes off, the glass smashes and blasts out along with the rest of it. And so because people had suffered glass cuts and had bits of glass, lodged in their skin, but it turned out that had just been from the glass that had been on the table itself, and rather it had been explosives and ball bearings that had been within the backpack itself. And it went off at our table and killed 3 people.
If you'd like to talk to someone about abuse that's taken place in your life, no matter how long ago it happened, your GP is always a good place to start. If that's not going to work for you, you can contact 1800-RESPECT on 1800-737-732 or via their website 1800respect.org.au. Or you can call Lifeline's 24-hour phone counselling service on 13 11 14.
So you were just saying that you found yourself in the ocean, but, surrounded by people, but alone, in the sense that you didn't know where your people were. You don't know the bombs have finished yet, or you don't know if they've finished yet. You don't know if, how were you ready to run then like a leader?
I mean, I'd run into the ocean and quite what to do from there. Like, I mean, it was one of those situations where it's like, I just had to stand here for now, because as you say, we didn't know what it was and whether it was over or not. And the very concept that someone would kill themselves to kill others was just, I couldn't even fathom it at that stage. It was, and so that was nowhere near my frame of reference. I did not think that was what had happened. I hadn't seen the first one. I'd felt the second one, but I hadn't seen anything. And so my logic, based on the way that I'd fallen and just like, what else could it have been, was maybe someone's planted a bomb under our table. And that's why I've blown sort of the way that I have on the angle that I have. That like it was the closest thing I could come up with that made sense. Because why would you kill yourself? Why wouldn't you just plant a bomb somewhere and put a timer on it to go off around about sunset when, you know, people will be there, the table will be full? That just made sense to me. And so I need to find other people. I need to find the rest of my group. And I guess most importantly for me was I needed to find a leader. My mum and my mum are best mates. Her dad and my dad are best mates. She's, 11 months older than me. I've known her my whole life. She's my oldest friend. You know, we're family. So I was in the water and I just started to yell her name. And then I heard someone else yelling her name. And I went splashing out of the water and followed the sound, and I found her father, Dietmar. And he grabbed me and we hugged, and he said, "Oh, those bastards." And then we just started looking for his wife and his daughter, because he'd lost both of them. And what had happened was Alida had run, and then Julia had run after her. And Dietmar had walked slightly away from the table to get a better perspective of what had just happened. So he hadn't seen them run off. And then obviously what had happened, and we'd sort of lost everyone. So he said, "You know, where are they?" I said, "Look, I saw Alida running to the south." So we started walking south, and we walked, you know, as far as until the sand. It wasn't that the sand stopped. It was that there was nothing else on the sand to the south. It was just like, look, there's nobody else. There's nothing more here. Maybe at some point they'd turned and gone to the north. So we turned and we walked to the north, and we got back towards the tables, and we had the idea of, look, maybe everyone is reassembled at the bus. And the bus had driven off, but it was like maybe they've come back and they're at the car park. So we went up to the car park, and there was just this, it was like a huge group of Balinese people, and they were squared off at one another, and it was just so, it was getting very, very intense. People screaming at one another, obviously in a language that I didn't understand. And I just sort of remember sort of being like, this looks like things are about to kick off. And I remember then having a moment of looking at all the people in this group and realized that they're all Indonesian, and then there's Dietmar and I. And I thought, we stand out like sore thumbs. I don't know what's about to happen here, but we need to get out of here. So Deet and I sort of made our way away from the car park back down onto the sand. And then we had to walk through the tables to get back onto the sand. Thought we'd just keep going north. Maybe that's the way they'd gone. And those moments walking through the tables, it was a minefield. Now I know logically now, of course it wasn't. I was at no stage in any danger. But during those moments when I had thought that there had been bombs placed under the tables, and there were all these dozens of tables, I was just like, any one of these is another bomb that's about to go off. And my footsteps could be the thing that sets it off. So that was, you know, the height of fear. And I remembered having a moment of like thinking that I was, 20 years old. And I thought, look, there have been people that particularly in, say, in the First World War who would have been my age and would have had bombs raining down on them from above every minute of every day for weeks, months, years on end. I just got to get through these tables.
I think it really speaks to your group of people. I would love to think that it speaks to Australians. I don't know if we're all this compassionate, but you say that now, and one of the ladies you speak to in the podcast who was on the beach that night, she said she remembers thinking, this happens all the time in places like Iraq, those poor people, you know, like immediately thinking about, I'm getting shivers just even repeating it to you, immediately thinking about okay, this happens. I'm not the first it's happened to. I'm not the last. Some people live with this every day as a way of comforting yourselves is really remarkable, I think.
I mean, look, I hopefully never have an experience like it again, but I suppose it's just where the mind goes is try to think like, well, there's always someone worse, isn't there? There's always someone worse off. And I also just was lucky enough to have Dietmar with me. And, you know, as I say, he's my dad's best mate. I've known him my whole life, and he is one of the most positive people I've ever met. And having him there helped because he's a mate, and, you know, you always feel a little bit better having a friend and having that point of reference of like, well, someone's worse off. And I'm like, yeah, that someone is standing next to me at the moment. He doesn't know where his wife and his daughter are. This must be the worst thing he's ever gone. Like, it's the worst thing I've ever gone through, and I'm safe and all my family are safe. He is in a state of unknowing right now that must be killing him. And at some point, he made a joke about that big blast going off back there, maybe perhaps having been a fart, asking me.
Dietmar!
It's like, was that you? And I was like, oh, mate.
Oh, God, you guys are a great advertisement for Newcastle, I have to say, this whole story. So how did you find, you know, there's one lady talks about getting a taxi back. Somebody talks about, in your podcast, talks about running into some nurses who were on holidays and they bundled them into a taxi and got them to the hospital. You know, how did you end up at the next place, and where was the next place for you?
So we went north and ended up in the, I forget whether it's the Intercontinental or the Four Seasons.
Intercontinental. It's my favourite, the Intercontinental. So again, I can visualise it. And you talk about, this was weird to me, you talk about stumbling in there, and because it's so beautiful, beautiful grounds, big grassy area, a bar to overlook the beach and the sunset. And it's almost like they didn't know what had happened, because it's like you wander in your undies and they're like, what do we got here?
Which was that moment of like, oh, well, that means nobody else has come here. You know, we'd sort of walked the beach to the point where we're like, there's nowhere else to go but to this, you know, whatever, to the Intercontinental. We walked in and said, look, you know, have you seen any more people looking like this? And they had no idea what had happened.
I mean, this has got to be at least a few minutes, right, after the first explosion. It's also like, you know, in Australia, it would be full sirens by that stage, and it would be like our, you know, emergency services would be arriving, or we could hear them coming. So I think that's worth noting as well, that in Bali, that doesn't necessarily happen, or not as quickly.
Well, having gone up there and them saying, no, like, you know, we haven't seen anyone, we then thought we would cover the ground back to the car park along the road in case that had happened. And going that way, that's when the sirens, the cars, and it was military. It wasn't like, I'm sure the police were there too, but I recall military because, hey, maybe police have guns like that in Bali, but there was a guy standing at a roadblock and he had an enormous assault rifle. And we went up to him to sort of say like, hey, can we come through? We just want to get to the car park to see if we can find our friends. And he wasn't having a bar of it. And a young Balinese man came and translated for us, and it was made abundantly clear that we weren't going to be able to go through. And so this young Balinese man said, look, come to my place, you know, I'll get you a drink of water and we'll work out what happens next. So he was so kind and so generous, bringing us into his home like that.
So Dietmar still doesn't know where his wife and daughter are, though, at this stage.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I don't know the details of how we got the cab, I'm not entirely certain of, but from this man and his family's home, we got into a cab and drove back to the hotel, just cars just pouring out of Kuta. And at that point, we'd heard there had been another bomb in Kuta. So it was, you know, if we were uncertain as to the truth of that, it was well and truly confirmed, because on a Saturday night, cars aren't coming out of Kuta at that rate, you know, like one car going into this party city and thousands of cars pouring out of it, something's gone wrong.
So the other bomb had gone off at Raja's restaurant. And I guess the feeling, and this is what terrorism is designed to do, is feeling like it's just everywhere. You don't know what's next. You don't know where it's going to be next. It feels like it's surrounding you. It reminds me of the September 11. Anyone old enough to remember that night in Australian time, remembers the feeling that, has it stopped? Is it still going? What's next? Where's next? So I guess that's the environment they've tried to create, and they have.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, I think that people on the podcast speak about, you know, someone saying, I'll take you to the hospital. And she said, no, they'll attack the hospital next.
Yeah.
You know, and that's sort of where you're at. Just nowhere is safe. And we got back to the hotel, and my family were waiting, and yeah, they were pretty obviously very emotional. They'd heard conflicting reports as to what had happened. There had been stories that I'd been accounted for, and then it had, you know, been said, no, he's not at the hospital. We don't know where he is. And so they'd been obviously terrified, but I turned up, you know, in one piece.
But also, your parents were effectively babysitting a lot of other people's kids, weren't they? Because they said, look, we're not going out, so if you guys want to go and you want to leave the kids behind, we're here. So they were dealing with a lot of kids not knowing where their parents were, what had happened to their parents.
Yeah. So there'd be 20 odd kids, as I say, aged between sort of 10 and 17. And all the parents, bar my folks and one of the other mums, Geraldine O'Connor, had stayed back. And so then it was left to the three of them to sort of oversee things. But when I got back with Deepmar, my dad is a doctor, and he immediately, you know, with the two of us accounted for, was just clicked into work mode and was like, I've got to go to the hospital. I need to help. So he jumped into the cab that we had been in, and he made his way off to go and help with the situation medically. And that then left, you know, my mum and Geraldine O'Connor as the two adults back at the hotel, sort of trying to keep a hold of things with all these kids who, just petrified, not sure where their parents were. And throughout the course of the night, you know, kids came to me and said, look, have you seen my parents? And I just said to them, I haven't seen anyone. But what I genuinely believed was, look at Deepmar, look at me, we're fine. Everyone that we've seen thus far and heard from thus far is okay. And I use the phrase popgun terrorists. These guys have turned up with a bag full of fireworks and have given us the fright of our lives, but everyone's okay. So you don't need to worry about your parents. Your parents are going to be fine. And there was no malice, but I relayed a lot of false hope to people, you know, regarding the state of people's health and, you know, their actual life at that stage.
I probably would have done the same thing, because I'm an optimist by nature, and so I'm always like looking on the brightest side of what might have happened. And certainly when you're talking to kids about their parents, I would be saying the same thing. I'm sure they're fine. And you were literally sitting at the same table as them. So for you to walk out the way you did, it would be a reasonable assumption that they were sort of behind you somewhere.
Yeah. And as I said, there had been, you know, we got reports throughout the course of the night of people who had been accounted for, and we were watching various TVs throughout the hotel, you know, and you know, some people are watching CNN, some are watching BBC, so we're getting different reports as to what's going on. And it wasn't so much the reports as just what the camera footage was showing. And we would see people that we knew, and there was this sort of game of telephone going on of like, oh, there's the Anisiches, there's the Zwolinskis. And so we sort of slowly accounted for people, and we're like, I think everyone's taken it, is accounted for. I think it feels like everyone's okay. And through such and such has seen someone and such has seen someone else, and then what I had seen, I went to bed and was just like, we're okay. Everyone's, you know, they're in hospital, they're accounted for, it's going to be okay. And I went to bed just secure in that knowledge. It was late, like 2-3 o'clock in the morning. And I went to bed sort of like, this is all just going to have been a bad dream. We'll all, you know, the holiday's ruined, but what are you going to do?
One of the Zwolinski boys talks in your podcast about seeing his mum on the news.
Yeah.
And realising later that she was actually deceased in that video that he was watching. He assumed, I've seen her, she's bloodied, But obviously she's okay because she's on the news.
Yeah. I mean, I'd not spoken to them until, I speak to them, but I hadn't spoken to them about what they'd gone through until we discussed it for that podcast. So, I remembered those moments of like we accounted for everyone, and I remembered accounting for the Zelinskys. So I was interested to hear what their take on it was and whether I was just remembering it the wrong way. But no, he confirmed it. It was like, no, we saw her. We thought she was okay, but it turned out she'd passed away by that point, and they were, showing, you can't say that the cameraman knew anything beyond it was just another bloodied person who'd been through the attack. I woke up in the morning. It was, sort of crack of dawn, and Mum woke me. And you have that moment of like, can you just give me a few more minutes, Mum? Like, seriously.
Yeah. I'm on holidays.
And I'm on holidays, and it was a pretty big night. Like, not the kind that you have on a Saturday in Bali, but a big night all the same. I've had about 3 hours sleep. I need a bit more. And she's just said, look, your father's at the hospital, and he wants you to take the passports for everyone and go to the hospital. And I was just I was sort of like, why? Like, what are we doing this for? And she said, look, I don't know, but that's what he's asked for. So get the passports, and you need to make your way there. So I went around and I collected the passports from the various rooms from the kids. They gave me their parents' passports. And along the way, I picked up Deepmar, who said he was coming with me, and Dane Griffiths, whose parents were in hospital as well, and he's my age. He was my best mate in primary school. So the three of us made our way into to Sanglar Hospital, which is sort of in the heart of Denpasar. And we got out. It was probably about 7 a.m., 7:30ish, and Dad was waiting for us, and he greeted us at the taxi and gave us a hug and walked us through. And we got to sort of the doors of the ward that he had been sort of put all the Aussies and our group in. And at that point, we said, look, Dad, what's going on? Why are we bringing these passports? What's happening? And he proceeded to tell us that everything was not all right, and that our assumptions of the evening before were pretty wide of the mark, and that people were seriously injured. A woman had lost her eye. Her husband was blinded, and it didn't look like he'd ever regained sight. There were people that had been just peppered with shrapnel, and he described it as looking like they'd been blasted by a shotgun. He described Paul Anasich as basically that he didn't expect him to survive. And then he said, and Jennifer Williamson, she hasn't survived. She passed away. So at that stage...
What a shock for you guys. I mean, yeah, you've genuinely gone to bed thinking, what a crazy story to tell. What we've lived through. And to find out how much more serious it is. There's another man in the group who lost the use of his legs, isn't there?
So he was at Rajah's, Terry Fitzgerald, and he was, with a different party.
That's right. And you talked to him as well. Oh, he lost the use of his legs and he lost his son. That's right. He was out with his son and daughter at Rajah's. Yeah. So again, the more you listen to this podcast, the more you feel the pain of the title.
Yeah.
The forgotten bombs. I feel like it keeps coming back to me. In the start of every show, you say the name again, and it's like, oh yeah, this is crazy that we aren't more aware of what happened. And the people that you talk to are so amazing. They're great talent. They're great at explaining, but they're also pretty much universally really compassionate people. You've talked to people who chose to go to the trial in Denpasar of a man who built the bombs. She talks so compassionately about, I just thought this poor boy when she looked at him in the dock. It's an incredible piece of like really bringing us to the place, the time, the situation. Even bugger you made me appreciate Tony Abbott. And I'm really unhappy about that because when I heard him in the preview, I thought, I'm not listening to that bit. But I did listen to that bit. And him talking about, he was health minister at the time who happened to be on holidays in Bali, took himself straight down, ran into your dad, and the logistics of getting Australians somewhere. Some of them woke up in Singapore. Some of them woke up in Denpasar. Some of them woke up in Darwin. Someone has to do that.
Yeah.
And he coordinated that.
I think I've said it, he turned up at the hospital, wearing a polo shirt and his joggers. So, if you need an indication that he's not there in an official capacity, I think that was it. And it had just been such a constant stream of what the hell's going to happen next that Tony Abbott turning up at the hospital, I was like, this isn't even on the podium of weird shit that's happened in the last 24
right
hours.
on, yeah.
You're down in 10th place.
Yeah. There's a great story about one young guy who didn't know who he was, just thought, I've seen him on the news basically. I know he's important. And he's asked him for help in cancelling a credit card because his mum had said from her hospital bed, my purse is still down there and it's got my credit cards in it down on the beach. And so he just goes and grabs Tony Abbott and says, can you cancel my mum's credit card? And he did. He did. He said, oh, no worries, I'll handle it. As he said, he was one of the few people there in 2005 who had a mobile phone, which today we jump on the app and cancel it.
Yes.
But even, 10 years ago, it was or 20 years ago now, it was different.
Yeah, but it's funny. Like I think back to why didn't I just text everyone and tell them that I'm fine? And it's like because I didn't bring my phone with me because it was just a brick that served no purpose, especially in a foreign country. I didn't have international roaming. I wasn't a millionaire. That wasn't going to happen. Whereas these days it's like $5 a day or something, and it's the same as being at home. So no, but yeah, back then to have a mobile phone that actually worked, he just provided a lot of really human, these really simple things that I think you all take for granted until you're faced with it not being available. Something as simple as lying in a hospital bed in a foreign country and thinking, oh God, my credit cards are on the beach. Someone's going to pick them up and I'm going to get home and have this crazy bill and I'm going to have to go through all the drama of explaining it and cancelling it and all that sort of stuff. And particularly for Vicky Griffiths, who at the end of it, I think spent another 6 weeks in hospital. It's just a drama you don't need. And so to have someone there who just says, yep, I'll take care of it. It's, it's a small thing, but it's an important thing.
It's a massive thing for her overall, emotional well-being in that moment. And again, it's heartbreaking, the distrust, from her perspective. She's thinking, well, someone's just tried to kill me down there. I'm sure they'll take my credit card if they come across it. But have you ever been back? I understand you haven't been back to Jimbaran Bay, but have you ever been back to Bali? Has anybody else in the podcast ever been back to Bali?
Lots of people have been back, and a number of them went back for the 20th anniversary. I haven't gone back. And it hasn't stopped me from experiencing the world, from traveling, from doing the things I want to do. I spent 7 months going through South America with my then girlfriend, and I'll never forget crossing over into Colombia from Ecuador. And the first thing you do as you cross over the border is there's this huge billboard that just says, my Spanish isn't great, but I know what terroristas means.
Yeah, wow.
And it was a dozen photos and there were just X's on the faces of the guys that had been accounted for. So I remember having a moment of well, at least they take it seriously. And, then lived in England for a number of years, traveled through Europe, did all that sort of stuff. And then on our honeymoon, on our way back, moving from England back to Australia, we went through Southeast Asia and went through, Vietnam and Cambodia and Thailand. So I've traveled, I've done a lot of things. And just as far as Bali goes, I guess the main thing I've always thought with it is there's 200 countries in the world, give or take. And I want to get to as many of them as I can. And particularly as you get older, it's okay, I'm going on a holiday. I'd like to enjoy my time there. And I feel like going to Bali, it would be certainly for the first time, it wouldn't be a relaxing break. It'd be there. I'd be heightened. I'd be tense. I'd feel uncomfortable for a lot of the time. And I'm just look, at some point in my life, I want to go back. And I'd really, really thought about it for the 20th anniversary. And this sounds selfish, but it is what it is. I was the government paid for people for 2002, the 20th anniversary, to go back to Bali. And I was if the government are going to pay for it, if they're going to pay for me to feel uncomfortable, sure. But I didn't want to pay for my own feelings of discomfort. And in the end, they were willing to pay for people to go to Bali for the memorial. But by that stage, I'd been fairly involved in the memorial in Newcastle, and I sort of felt like I needed to be there and bring that one home. So it wasn't to be. And as I say, I think at some stage in my life, I'll go back, but I don't, there's no feeling within me of like, oh, I'm avoiding it. Or that I'm missing something, or that I need to go back and make my peace, or anything like that. It's just another one of the many countries that I went to once, and I haven't been lucky enough to visit again at this stage.
You talk a lot in the podcast about mental health, obviously, and you talk about the fact that why am I doing this podcast? Why am I doing it all? Well, because you can, basically. You sort of give the impression that you don't feel like it's impacted your mental health negatively in a massive way. Is that fair to say? The load. You talk about the load and that you can carry it.
Yeah. I think everything that happens to you shapes who you are, and everything that happens to you changes who you are. I went for a run the other day and I tripped over on a particular piece of pavement, and I nearly went sprawling out into the middle of the busiest street in my suburb. And you have that moment of like, shit, like if I hadn't have caught myself at that last moment, I would have died just then. And you know what? I'm super careful when I run over that piece of pavement now. So like the tiniest little thing changes who you are. Now, this was a really, really big thing, and it changed who I am, but in ways that it doesn't really bear thinking on, because it's happened. It is what it is. And for a number of years, it meant that I was unable to do certain things with any level of confidence. Being in big crowds, it just didn't work for me. Loud bangs still get me a little bit.
You talked specifically about being at a big sporting event and there being too many backpacks. And I thought, oh, of course, I never thought of that. Like just that.
It's funny. I can't remember how many years ago it was, but they made a reasonable song and dance about how they had replaced all the garbage bins at Central Station in Sydney with clear bins, so that you wouldn't have to worry about there being bombs in the bins. And I'm like, that's great. Everyone's got a backpack.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about the bin.
Yes. And again, I don't think like that, because it's never happened to me. Yeah, I don't notice backpacks, and you do.
Yeah. So I had my struggles with it. I have never been worried about asking for help. In like 90% of situations, I'm pretty upfront about when I'm having struggles with almost anything. I'm really lucky that I have super supportive friends and family. So I remember I came up with my dad. My dad is obviously he saw things that I couldn't imagine, and went through things in that hospital over those sort of 24, then back in Darwin, and yeah, he had a series of days that I couldn't ever fathom. And I asked him at some point, like, did you ever want to go see a mental health professional about that? And he said, no, I've got mates. And I was a bit like, oh. And so I was like a bit like, oh, I don't want my dad to know that I'm going to see a mental health professional. And it wasn't until later on that he was like, mate, that's me. I'm not you. And what works for you, and what works for me. Like, don't ever think that no, like you do what you got to do, mate. Like, he's always super, super supportive. And obviously my mum, she was the one I called when I said, I'm not dealing with things well. I think I need help. And she organized for me to go see a psychologist. And so, my family were always really amazing, helping me with that sort of stuff. And it was funny. I lived with a group of mates over that summer. My parents owned this rental property in Newcastle, and a few of my mates and we moved into the top floor, and then Dad very kindly / foolishly rented out the bottom floor to more of my mates. So there were 8 of us living in these 2 flats, and it was just the best summer ever. But that was the summer that followed on from Bali. So we were partying, we were having a good time. And I don't want to pretend like I was miserable or anything, but I was going through some different stuff than the rest of the boys. And one of my mates listened to the podcast and he sent me a message recently and he said, look, I'm really sorry that I wasn't a better friend to you during that period. And I just sort of thought, mate, you were the best friend that you could have hoped to have been. You were 20 years old. Never mind that very few 20-year-olds have any of the emotional maturity to deal with basic stuff that people are going through. This is, I would hope, a completely unique situation that none of us have any experience with and none of us will go through again. And I just remember all my friends being so amazing for me. And I'm sure they have those moments of like, oh, I should have said this, I should have done that. And that's the kind of thing that you think, yeah, and if you were 40 years old, well, that's how you would have reacted. But at 20, I don't know, you hugged me and you gave me a beer and those were the tools that you had at your disposal and you were always too willing to give them. So I think, yeah, I had struggles, but I also had support. And that's, isn't that the best you can hope for?
Yeah, and you make the point that you and these Wolenski boys and some other of the young people who were there have, are living great productive lives. Great partners, you are fathers, you are, normal, dare I say. You have managed to move past it. They lost both their parents that day, the Wolenski boys. There's so much more in this podcast that we haven't covered, which is good news because people need to go and make sure that they download and listen to your podcast, Forgotten Bombs, Bali 2005. As I said earlier, the research that you go into the bombers, into the political context, the regional context, it's a really impressive piece of work.
Speaking to Nasir Abbas was, I think, one of the few things that I was really quite astounded by. He was an inaugural member of Jemaah Islamiyah, and when you sort of get on the trail of this particular subject, a number of sources seem to be used and reused by a lot of people. And so Nasir had come up in a number of the interviews and papers and things that I'd read and researched. And I was speaking to one of my very, very first sources who she didn't end up appearing on the podcast, but she was one of the first people that speaking to her, I was like, oh, there's something more here. There's a big story because she had such amazing context to give me. And we spoke at the start of the whole thing when my wife was about 8 months pregnant. And then on my daughter's second birthday, I went, I need to call Sydney again because you didn't exist the last time I spoke to her. So we spoke and we had another really great conversation. And by that stage, it had been 2 years of sort of me being initially the church mouse and then growing bolder and bolder and realizing that it's like, you just got to ask people because if you don't ask, they won't say yes. And if you do ask, all they can say is no. And what's the harm there either? So I just said to her, I was like, do you know Nasir Abbas? And she went, yeah. I went, do you reckon I could talk to him? And she went, what are you going to ask him? And I said, I think I'll talk to him about like the internal structures of Jemaah Islamiyah and the way that it worked in that regard. And she went, no, don't waste his time with that. I want you to think of 3 really important, worthwhile questions, and then you can speak to him, okay? And I was like, oh, okay. And
now
she put me in touch with him.
Tell us who Nasir Abbas is.
So Nasir Abbas, an inaugural member of Jemaah Islamiyah, he, as a teenager in the 80s, went to Afghanistan and he spent 3 years in the military academy there. And this was at the time when the Russians had invaded Afghanistan. So he was initially learning guns, bombs, basically how to be a soldier, but also how to be a guerrilla warfare soldier. So
and
not
funded by America, we should point out. In those days, the Mujahideen were funded by America.
And Osama bin Laden.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so he met Osama, didn't he? He said, oh, yeah, I met Osama. Yeah, he was around back in the day.
It's a wild story.
It is.
And he spent 3 years learning, and then he spent 3 years as an instructor himself. And then when he went back to Malaysia, reported directly to the founders of Jemaah Islamiyah, and he helped them to set up training camps. And obviously, having spent 6 years in an active theatre of war, he was, a great resource to them and rose through the ranks to become one of the leaders in Jemaah Islamiyah. And he actually trained and taught the guys who set up the 2005 Bali bombing. So he had a moment of, telling me how guilty and awful he felt about what he'd done to teach these guys, you know, to do the things that they did. But having been warned, look, don't waste his time, I get on the Zoom meeting with him, and I'm just sort of like, heart's going a mile a minute, like, what's this going to be like? And he's this just happy, smiling Indonesian man in his 60s. He's like, Joe, hi, it's so nice to meet you. And I was just like, what's going on?
But again, it's a great way, you know, of reminding us, telling us, showing us that these are people. These are people. And you do that in many, many ways. If it's the lady talking about the guy that she saw in the dock, or this conversation that's part of the podcast, people are people. There's no monsters in this story. There's people who make decisions. Or one guy talks about being groomed. Was it him? Talked about being groomed. It was him, yeah. Being groomed by the organisation as a teenager. So you're very successful in that regard. I'm so glad you brought that up, because this is what I'm saying about so much more that you bring to the story. It's not just your story. You really look into how this happened, why this happened, who were these people. So it's a fascinating piece. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to our guest, Joe Frost. There's a link to his podcast in the show notes. If you need support after listening to this podcast, you can call Lifeline on 13 11 14 or contact 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732 or 1800respect.org.au. Indigenous Australians can contact 13 Yarn on 13 92 76 or 13yarn.org.au.